You can use my first name. Folks around here know me as Wes. I'm in West Virginia, and I don't want to say more than that. I've also changed the names of the exact places because I'm not looking to start trouble with my neighbors or any possible game wardens. This happened last November. It was current raccoon season and about a week before deer season started, as I recall. I was out on the old railroad grade that runs behind a pasture I call Miller's Pasture. That's not its real name, but anyway, it then crosses a small creek that I'm going to call Perkins Creek, also not the real name. I was out that night planning to run my coon dogs. But that night, well, I saw something that I still don't have a name for, at least not one I'm comfortable with using. I'm going to start where things like this usually start, with the dogs. I hunt two blue ticks named Moose and Boomer. They're good dogs and very seasoned. If you've ever hunted nights, you know how the whole world can narrow down to what your dogs are telling you and whatever is in the thin cone of light coming from your headlamp. Everything else ceases to exist. I had my dogs boxed up in the back of my Ford F-150. Anyway, I was easing along the gravel because the grade there is flat and quiet. And just so you understand, this grade I'm talking about used to be an actual working railroad track, but it isn't anymore. Some years back, they came in and pulled up most of the metal track pieces. I guess they melted them down and reused them or something. Anyway, all that's left out there are the rotting ties and a lot of gravel. A lot of us in this area use that grade to go back and forth, and we use it for hunting. It's getting grown up a bit, but not like you would think it would after all these years, probably because we are all still using it. Well, that night, it was cold enough that you could see your breath, and there was a white layer of fog laying down in all the low spots on the ground. The moon was up high in the sky, and the stars were nice and bright. It was a very clear night, very cold, too. Somewhere over the ridge, I heard a few soft hoots from what sounded like a great horned owl. There was no wind, just that dry November stillness where every sound seems sharp and unexpected. I'd started at the Miller Gate, eased down to the wide spot past the pump jack, and then idled along with my foot halfway down on the brake, going so slow the speedometer barely registered. If you hit your high beams on that grade, you can see straight to the bend at Perkins Creek, where it's just grass beyond the gravel and a few sweet gum saplings come up where the railroad ties are. Back behind me in the dog boxes, I heard Moose start that low huffing that he does when he's caught a noseful of something on the air. Boomer was quiet, which was not like him at all. He's a mouthy, happy idiot of a dog, especially when he catches a scent. I had already cracked the back window between the truck and the truck bed so that I could listen to them, and even though it was cold, I had both windows down so I could hear what was going on outside. The best I could figure is maybe a coon was coming in off the creek, probably skirting around on the grade with the gravel like I've seen them do. But yet there was also another smell riding the cold air that was coming in through the windows. Something else, not just the smell of the creek, the truck diesel, and the old leaves. Best I can describe for you, it was like rotten tilapia and hot metal copper with a splash of wet dog thrown in. And there was something else about it, something else about that smell, its shape. Now, people laugh when I say that because they don't think that smells have a shape. But they can, and they do, and this one did. It came in like a rounded wave, like someone was behind it, pushing it steadily ahead of them as they walked. Moose eased up to a whine. Boomer, well, I swear to you, I heard Boomer back up in the box till his butt thumped the plywood. I heard his claws scrabble on the floor, trying to push back even harder, and then he came to a dead stop and went silent. He had set himself down. I had never known him to back up and get quiet about anything, except maybe an impending bath. I heard the horned owl pick up its hooting again, and it started repeating it every few seconds. Somehow that felt reassuring. I clicked my high beams on out of habit, just to throw some light a little further along, and the old track grade lit up. Silver-white gravel, pale grass, and fog like cloth laying around in cuts. There's an iron bridge girder that's still laying off to the right where they didn't haul that out. There's also the old milepost stump over on the other side. But other than that, there's not much else out there. Suddenly I noticed the owl cut off mid-hoot, and it went silent. That whole holler went like a radio someone snapped off. Even the creek seemed to stop all of its noise. Well, so what if it did, I thought. It didn't concern me none. I idled down another 50 yards on the grade, just listening to the tiny pops of gravel under my tires. Then Moose suddenly started a chopping, harsh barking sound that he does when a hot track hits his nose. I braked and let him smell it on the air. I should have been paying more attention to the front and less to the back, because that's when something really big took 2 steps in the sumac bush off to my left. This wasn't a twiggy, snappy noise. This wasn't a brush noise. It was weight shifting down on the dirt with a layer of soft gravel grinding underfoot and the twisting of leaf debris. 2 steps, then quiet. It must be deer, I told myself. Probably a big old doe. Maybe a buck still out there cruising around this late. Except deer didn't smell like that. And deer don't freeze dogs up like someone just grabbed them by their scruffs. Well, not my dogs, anyhow. I put the truck in park and set the brake. I killed my headlights to listen better in the dark, if you know what I mean. But I left the parking lights glowing like little amber eyes way down low. I kept the windows down all the way, and I leaned out my driver's side window just to get a better listen. And by golly, I heard it. Breathing. It was slow and deep, pulling even breaths into deep, big lungs. I guessed it wasn't 10 yards off from the grade. I don't carry much gun for hunting coons. If I shoot, I'm shooting a .22, so I'm not up there to do elk or deer business. You know, a lot of hunters like to talk big. They say they'll shoot anything, even if they can't name it. That's not me. I won't. I'm not even going to try to bluff you on that. I know if I shoot out into the darkness, that bullet is going to land somewhere. I've got neighbors with trailers that back up to those trees. Nope, not firing into the dark at what I don't know for sure what's there. So I just sat and I listened. But I got real still. "Easy, Moose," I whispered through the back window. I heard his nails do that little trimmer on the wire of the door. Then it stopped. Boomer was still silent. I eased the dash light down so the interior was almost completely blacked out, so I could see outside the truck better. Then I took off my hat, which had a headlamp banded onto it. I clicked it on low and kept it down in my lap. Then I tucked it into my hat and put my hand over it so the light didn't shine up. But it was still ready if I needed it in a moment's notice. I had learned to do that because that particular headlamp was pretty fiddly, and it could be a you-know-what to turn it on in a hurry. Right when I did that, I heard it move again. I heard it move closer. You know how sometimes when you're inside and somebody walks past your window outside the window and they sort of blot out the moonlight and the darkness outside is suddenly darker? That's kind of what happened. It's hard to explain, but that's the closest I can get. The shadows from that side of the truck where the sumac was, they stepped out into the dim light from my parking lights and kind of arranged themselves into a big shape that was standing just off the gravel, maybe 10 feet ahead of the bumper of my truck, and maybe half that to the side. It was darker than the darkness around it, so I could see it, weird as that sounds. This thing was a broad wall of darkness. I was just getting the outline of its size and shape as my eyes adjusted to the darkness and the darker shadows there. I saw a head shape and shoulders, but danged if I saw any indentation like a neck. I couldn't see details. The lower part of it melted into the sumac and other shadows. But it was tall. I'm sitting in my truck, and I kind of had to look up out the window to see it. I froze up fast and hard. I still had a fist wrapped around the headlamp that was folded inward inside my hat, and it's a wonder I didn't break it. I was so tensed up, including my fist. Through the open window, I could still hear it breathing. To be sure of what I was hearing, I held my own breath. Oh, yeah, something was close by all right, breathing. Then the breathing stopped. It was dark, but I know my eyes went wide. I remember thinking how stupid I was to have the windows down. Not that a truck window could have stopped it, whatever it was. I'm thinking about that, and then, Lord help me, it stepped one pace, and it came square to in front of my truck. It was close enough then that the little amber glow off my parking lights lit up the edges of it. I saw the left forearm swing when it walked in front of my truck, and I could finally see the mass of it. I saw that arm come down past what would have been a man's hip, only this thing's hand hung lower. I saw the pattern of hair along the arm and on its upper thighs and lower abdomen until the amber lights didn't light it up so well. My hood line comes to about my chest when I stand outside next to it. The top of the hood was riding between its hips and lowest rib, so I guess you'd call that the waist area. Now you can figure that measurement out for yourself. Moose didn't bark. Boomer didn't make a sound. Then suddenly, one of them made a sound that I've never heard from either of my dogs, and I'm not sure which one it was. It was a small and squeezed kind of sound, like someone had a vice grip around their throat or their neck. But they didn't. I caught a glimpse of Boomer through the back window. His muzzle was pressed up to the small wire window at the back of his box that looked into the cab of the truck. I couldn't see Moose at all. I felt the front of the truck suddenly dip down. I looked back to the front, and I saw that this thing had a hand on the hood. I felt the truck bounce lightly again. It was pushing down again and again on the hood of the truck, lightly bouncing. Why? I don't know. But it was looking in at me as it did it. It was the strangest thing. I couldn't see its face well, but it was enough by the shape that I knew it was looking at me. I could feel it, and every hair on my body stood straight up. "Hey there," I said reflexively. I said it in a normal tone, like I just saw a neighbor outside while I was mowing the grass. The bouncing stopped, and I heard what I can only call an answer of some kind. But it wasn't words. It was a chesty-sounding thing. You ever feel a bass amp hit you right in the ribs? It was like that, but alive, a soft whoomp that reached through the glass and put a hand on my sternum and pressed. This beast, this creature, the shadow blob, the Bigfoot, call it whatever you like. It then tilted its head. I saw the shape as it moved, even though I couldn't see the face clearly. The movement was clear. And that's the part that sticks with me all the way to now. The way it did that slow bird head tilt, like it was listening for something or waiting for me to say something else. Slowly, I reached over with my left hand and hit the 2 window buttons and closed both windows. A freight train couldn't have been any louder there in the darkness to my ears, though. I know the shadow out there heard the windows close, but it didn't move. I was thinking of the next step that I needed to take to back out of this situation. I shoved my hat and headlamp further down between my legs, put my right hand on my gear shift, and my left hand gripped the steering wheel. I was just about to shift to reverse when it turned and took another 2 steps, clearing the grade and walking over into the darkness. The glow of my parking lights lit the hair on the back of its legs and its butt, and for just a second before it went too far past where the lights reached, I saw it. A wide, full back, wide and powerful shoulders. I saw the swing of the long arms and the back of 2 incredibly massive legs. Its head was always just an outline. It was just too high above the glow of the parking lights. But the outline, well, it wasn't a rounded head, and I wouldn't call it pointed either. It sat forward and down on the chest more than a person's would. Even though I knew it was looking in at me at one point, I'm not going to say that I saw its eyes or its expression, because I didn't. But that didn't stop me from knowing it was looking at me, though. I sat there, half expecting, no, half wanting some guys to run out from the sides, starting laughing, showing me they recorded a good prank on me and they were uploading it somewhere. But that didn't happen. I was out there good and far. There was no quick getting out for me. I was closer to my exit than I was to my entrance, so I sucked it up and started rolling forward again. But I kept looking over to where it had gone in the darkness until I was long past that point. Even then, I kept looking in the mirror, just waiting for it to come running up behind me. And that thought did it. I stepped lightly on the gas pedal. Not enough to throw gravel, not so fast that I couldn't have stopped or safely swerved if it did come running back out at me. But I was going as fast as I thought was safe. Let's call it 15 or 20 miles an hour. The moon was bright enough that I could still see my way, and the light gravel made it easy. I was just starting to breathe easier, and I was thinking that I must have had some kind of weird one-off hallucination, or maybe I just encountered somebody's trained bear that got loose, or something, anything, when I heard a metallic clank. Something hit my truck. Something like a rock. Now that smell from earlier was getting stronger again. I looked over to the right of my truck, and I was sure I saw a shadow jogging along just out of the reach of my parking lights. Okay, enough, I thought. I kicked on my headlights, hit the brights so I could see all along the edges, and I started to hit the pedal, and gravel did fly. I heard Boomer and Moose's clattering on the plywood as I accelerated. Sorry, boys, just trying to get us out of here. I did get us out of there, and I kind of took the long way home to make sure I stayed on well-lit, well-paved roads. Now, normally, I would get to the end and I would just turn around and go back. I usually like the quiet. I love the popping sound of the gravel under my tires. But not that night. I got home and I got the boys out of their boxes, and that surprisingly took some doing. They just didn't want to come out. But they did trust me, so they came out. Moose came out first, took a big old whiz on the tree right there by the back porch. I guess they had some kind of arrangement. Boomer kept watch while Moose did his whiz, and then they traded places. I finally got them put up in their run, which, don't worry, it's attached to an 8x10 wood shed I built for them. It's insulated, has heat, and comfy beds for them, so they weren't vulnerable all night. That's their shelter. I knew they'd be all right. Well, they took off and they went straight inside their shelter. I didn't hear a peep out of them the rest of the night. I went in and I was calmed down by then, but I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, the tilt of that head would come back. It was curious, I think. What was I going to do? I couldn't stand it, though. I had to go back there the next afternoon. Well, you know I did. Sun was already high when I rolled through Miller's Gate. The frost was gone off the patches in the shade, and I parked in the same ruts that I had used the night before. I took a tape measure because, well, of course I did, because men do math when they're scared or worried. And if they don't understand it, math solves it. If it's this, then it has to be that, and if it has to be that, then I know what I saw. Well, that's how men try to think anyway. I walked to the spot, and the first thing that I noticed was the gravel. Have you ever seen where a calf's been dragging its toes across a bed of limestone? It leaves little fans where the rocks slide and catch. There were 4 of those in a line, left to right, long stride in between. In 2 of them, you could see that something like toes had pressed down in the mud under it, and then the rock was skinned back over it. You want a clean print? Go look at the movies in Hollywood, because out here, well, that's what we get. Scuffs, a curved line like a heel in one place, and broken sumac and sweet gums in another. Down toward the creek where it had gone off that night, there were hand-sized smudges on the dirt that could have been from anything, I guess. Coons, a person, a dog. Except nobody puts a hand down quite like that. In November, in the cold mud. On one of the old rail tie plates that had been left there rusting away, there was a smear of something a darker red-brown than the rust. Maybe like iron water had dried in a little spot. Was it mud? Blood? I didn't know, but I wasn't going to rub it in my fingers and sniff it to find out. At the creek, there's a sandbar where the water drops out of the cut and swirls. On the far side, where a deer trail crosses, clean as day, there were 2 prints that made the hair on my neck stand up. They weren't pretty or textbook-like prints, but they were there, with a flared front where the toes would be, and far, oh lordy, lordy, far, far apart from each other. The bar was all messed up by raccoons, too. There were little tiny handprints all over. But those 2 big marks, those were in the clear between all that other stuff. I stood there with my tape measure in my hand, like somehow that would bless the scene and make it all real and logical. I measured from the toe of one to the heel of the other. 41 inches. I measured the width across the ball. 8 and some change. I said numbers out loud because it made them feel less like a dream. I drove to Miller's place, and I told him that I'd been on his grade that night, and that I'd be bracing the gate back the same way I found it, I promised. He asked me if I'd gotten anything. Had I seen anything? I told him no, I didn't catch any coon. He seemed disappointed, and he said that he'd had something get into his corn pile the last 2 nights running. He thought maybe it was some kids. I didn't say much. He looked at me the way people do when they're wanting you to take your part and step up on a hard issue because they didn't want to. And when I didn't, he sucked air through his big teeth gap and said, "Well, if you do see them, you tell them I got buckshot loaded for them." I nodded and said I sure would, and I went on. All week I tried to put what I had seen into shapes I already knew. The big bear, except we really don't have big bear like that here, not that big, and certainly not with arms that swing like that. A big man in a suit? Well, there's no man that I know that could possibly pull that off, and none would be so stupid as to mess with someone who is obviously out there hunting with dogs in the back of a truck. That's a truck full of whoop you-know-what, waiting to be unleashed if you mess with it. I keep thinking about the answer it gave me, too. Or did I imagine that? Was it just some sound and not any form of communication? There's a big part of me that knows it was an answer. It was an honest-to-God answer, an attempt at communication. But then the other part of me says no. It was just an animal-like response. Talk to a cat and they may meow at you. It doesn't mean it's necessarily talking to you. But that head tilt, I still think about that, though. I'm not too far away from where this happened, within just a couple miles, where I live, that is. And I'm close enough that I'm very cautious still around at my place at night now. Now, the following Friday after that happened, I had a curious thing, though. I'm not saying it's definitely related, but it's strange enough that it makes me wonder. My motion light went off in the backyard at 2 a.m. I just happened to be awake, as I had been most of that week, staring at the ceiling, wishing to goodness I could fall asleep. But I laid there and I saw that light go off. And yet, not a single peep from my dogs. Alarm bells went right off in my head. I sat up in bed, and I was already sweaty, and I was mad at myself for being sweaty. I sat there, waiting and listening. After about 30 seconds of silence, my ears were ringing, so I got up and went to the kitchen and looked out over the sink into the darkness. The motion light on the edge of the garage shone out into the yard and over the portion of the drive where my garbage can stood. The trash can at the farthest edge was open. The concrete block that I kept on top of it was sitting by its side. Garbage was opened and spread around. I stood there for a long time, looking, waiting. For what? I don't know. But once or twice I thought I caught that smell of hot copper and rotten fish, and it had somehow found its way inside my closed-up house. Not once did my dogs make a sound. If it had been a raccoon rooting around, or a person, you can believe they would have woke up everyone for a couple miles around. They had before. But not a sound that night, just like the night I saw the shape. I went out and cleaned it all up in the morning. I took a good look around, but I didn't see anything that made me sure it was the shadow blob or whatever you want to call it. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But if so, it's a really weird one because I don't live on blacktop, as they say. I mean, I'm not in a city or a suburb, not somewhere where people would come out to just root through trash. And I don't have raccoons that do weightlifting big enough to lift concrete blocks and set them down next to a garbage can. I still run the grate out there with my dogs. I have a couple more now just to be sure. I'm not going to let anything take this enjoyment, this wondrous enjoyment that I get out of being out there and roaming the nights. I haven't seen it since. I still listen for the great horned owl. And I do keep my windows up when I'm out there, much more than I used to, though. I know that glass is no protection, but it does make it a little less likely that something in the dark can just reach in quickly and grab me before I know it. The dogs will still hunt out that stretch of grade, though for the first few weeks after, Moose would only look at that spot, then look at me and wait for me to say so. When people press me, was it Bigfoot that night on the grade? I can't give them what they want. I only tell them what I have told you. I tell them I know what it felt like when my truck was bounced. I tell them my dogs know whatever it was my dogs knew that night and why they were so afraid. I tell them that I know that I smelled something and that I saw something, and I will describe that something for them. But I will not give it a name. They can call it whatever they want, and so can you. I guess a channel on Bigfoot is about as good as any other that will likely read my email and believe me. So it's yours now. You've got the story. You call it whatever you want. Do what you want with it. Signed, Wes.